It's great to be with you all, and to all of you people online. Great to have you here as well. And appreciate those who have prepared some foods and snacks. And of course, tonight we welcome in the Tuesday night on-campus devotional participants. So anyway, good to have you all here as well. So as you can see, and as you know, tonight we're looking at A Christmas Carol. So we'll do a little bit of an intro, first of all, and then we'll talk about the author, Charles Dickens. And then we'll do an overview. We'll kind of divide that into two parts. We'll look at the different characters, and then we'll look at the outline of the story. And then finally, we'll look at some insights, some things we can learn. And really, those have everything to do with worldview. Last quarter, we had a whole 13 weeks of looking at worldview and how that affects us and how we can be different as Christians. And really, that's what the insights will kind of focus on. I want to read two little introductory summaries right here at the beginning. This is from the Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park. They must have been obviously performing A Christmas Carol at some point, and this was in their little write-up of it, called The Second Greatest Christmas Story Ever Told. And hopefully you all know the first. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol has endured generations of faithful audiences since its publication in 1843. History and literary lore tell of the author's speedy writing and self-financed production of the novel. He wrote the story in 6 weeks, printed 6,000 copies that sold out in 5 days, and only turned a meager profit because he had foot the bill for printing. Nevertheless, Dickens' story about a sinner who's given one last chance at redemption has proven to be a timeless work of art that's fostered much scholarly research. And then another one, this one's just from Wikipedia, but it leads into what I want to show you in a second. Dickens was the most popular novelist of his time and remains one of the best known and most read of English authors. His works have never gone out of print and have been adapted continually for the screen since the invention of cinema, with at least 200 motion pictures and TV adaptations based on Dickens' works documented. Many of his works were adapted for the stage during his own lifetime, and as early as 1913, a silent film of the Pickwick Papers was made. And here is a list of, and this is not all of them, because I'm going to show you a top 10 list of adaptations of A Christmas Carol, and a few of them aren't even on this list, but these are 50 different movies and different adaptations made from Christmas Carol. And I know you guys can't read that. You might be able to read some of them, but just to show you the sheer quantity of people and organizations and studios who have taken advantage of this amazing story. So I'm going to give you the top 10 just because that's kind of fun. Ms. Mojo is the one who came up with this top 10 list of the adaptations of A Christmas Carol. Number 10 is Jim Carrey's A Christmas Carol, came out in 2009. And this is one of my two favorites. And so if you've never seen, this is animated, by the way, which Jim Carrey's pretty animated anyway. But anyway, it's a great version. If the internet connection is good enough, I'll show you a little clip from that at the very end. Doctor Who's Christmas Carol was ranked number 9. Mickey's Christmas Carol from 1983 was number 8. Number 7 is Blackadder's Christmas Carol. And I think that's that Mr. Bean guy. I'm not sure, but anyway, that one's a comedy, as you might imagine. Then there was one in 70 just called Scrooge. And that starred Albert Finney. And if you look down on the credits, Alec Guinness was in this. And I don't know how they fit Obi-Wan Kenobi into the Scrooge story. George C. Scott, this might be the one that you all are maybe the most familiar with, came out in 1984. They ranked it 5th. The 1938 version was ranked 4th. And then this is my second favorite. This is one of my two favorite versions of A Christmas Carol. Bill Murray plays a TV executive who is just like Scrooge and just terrible and awful, and all he cares about is money. And of course, he is changed overnight into a wonderful, giving individual. But anyway, that was 1988 in my very informative years. And then the Muppet Christmas Carol, it got number 2 of all the adaptations, number 2. And then number 1, 1951's A Christmas Carol. And this was done in England, and it was and cast over there, produced over there, and it was called Scrooge in Great Britain. And then when they brought it here to America, they called it A Christmas Carol. And if you ever look at one of those big giant lists, you'll see several of them are called Scrooge, several of them obviously A Christmas Carol, and on and on. But this hasn't stopped. Greg gave me this assignment, when would it have been? August or even July, maybe the end of July. And it just so happens that within the last 4 weeks, 2 commercials have come out that focus in on A Christmas Carol. And so the first one is Peloton, and let's hope these things run. We'll see. They may not. The internet connection was not very good for the videos. Here we go. Okay, hopefully it's gonna work.
'Twas the holiday season and joy filled the town, except for Scrooge, with his perma-frown. The gift of a Peloton bike did touch his soul. Riding fast, flowing proud, getting hella swole.
You can do it!
I'm doing it!
Was Scrooge a new man?
Yeah!
Oh, without doubt. When your workout's a joy,
All right, that came
it's
out
a
about 4 weeks
joy
ago.
to work out.
And then about the same exact time, this one came out.
Ebenezer. Ebenezer.
Marley?
First, you will see the past.
Excuse me, coming through.
And then, the present. And finally, Ebenezer, the future.
Introducing the all-electric EQS. Happy holidays from Mercedes-Benz.
If any of you have a lot of money, I'm sure Landon, Greg, and I wouldn't mind some ministerial gifts of the Mercedes-Benz for Christmas. But anyway, okay. So bottom line with that is A Christmas Carol it's not died, and it doesn't seem like it'll die anytime soon. I mean, the Scrooge is a known commodity. Even Ebenezer, when that commercial starts, everyone knows who Ebenezer is. And then maybe not Marley. And of course, in that commercial, it's a little not quite right because Marley shows him the past, the present, and the future, as opposed to the 3 spirits. But still, this has been something that has permeated our culture and has permeated Western culture since the 1800s, mid 1800s. So the author is Charles Dickens, as you know, born February 7th, 1812, and he died on June 9th, 1870. At a young age, died at 58, but he did a lot of work during that time. These are his novels: The Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, The Old Curiosity Shop, Barnaby Rudge, Martin Chuzzlewit, Dombey and Son, David Copperfield. Sorry about that. There we go. Bleak House, Hard Times, Little Dorrit, A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, Our Mutual Friend, and The Mystery of Edwin Drood, and he did not finish that. He died in 1870. All of these novels, every one of them, was a serial novel. They came out piece by piece in different publications, whether they were newspapers or magazines. And with Edwin Drood, he died in June, but they were published through September. He was ahead in his writing, which I'm sure his editors appreciated. Greg always appreciates how prompt all his writers for Gospel Advocate are. And but anyway, so he was on top of his game. He was way ahead of where he needed to be. And this, I do want to just share with you the idea of these serial novels, I had never heard of this, but this is what he did with every single one of those. And here's a little publication that was in a newspaper, new work by Mr. Charles Dickens in number 84 of All the Year Round, to be published on Saturday, December the 1st. And then the title, Great Expectations, a new serial story. And it says to be continued from week to week until completed in about 8 months. And with these serial novels, Dickens, he would listen to the public's feedback from one of the ones he said, and he would change his stories sometimes based on that. So it wasn't like the novel was completed and he chopped it into 20 parts and submitted them to newspapers for 20 weeks. These things were an ongoing publication, an ongoing idea, an ongoing story. And one time with David Copperfield, one of his acquaintances didn't like the way one of the characters was. She thought it was a little too like her. And so he changed the character, and just really amazing to think about. And I had never heard of these until 1996. Stephen King came out with The Green Mile, and he did it as a serial to kind of go back to the old days. And I remember reading the first one. And if you know anything about Stephen King books, they're usually this wide. Well, this thing was just really thin, as you can see, number one. And I read it and I was captivated, and I couldn't wait for number 2 and couldn't wait for number 3, couldn't wait. And I mean, so I kind of got a feel at the time for how things were happening in the 1800s and how that used to work. But it was quite amazing. And the Pickwick Papers, his very first, and I'll mention that in just a second again, but he was only 24 or 25 years old when he wrote the Pickwick Papers, and it was going so well. He introduced a new character in like week 5 or 6, and the character was so popular that other people started selling merchandise, Pickwick merchandise, and other things. And this was marketed. You know, sometimes we complain when a new movie comes out that McDonald's has the toys for the kids and so has the board game, but that they were doing it over there in Great Britain in the 1800s, and I'm sure here as well. So pretty interesting how he wrote his stuff. These are some of his short stories, and I'm not going to go through everything he wrote, obviously, but I do want you to notice the third one down, The Signal Man. There was a time in his life where he was on a train and traveling, but anyway, he was on a train, and all the first class cars of the train crashed. All the first class cars of the train crashed except for his. And he saved some people's lives. He went the extra mile before more help came to help out. And the story goes, as he was leaving, he remembered one of his manuscripts was in the car that he had left to help other people. And he went back and got it, and everything was fine with that. But anyway, he wrote something later that was based, The Signal Man was based on, partly on that experience that he had. He was an advocate for social change, and he became, you know, we have those commercials today even to get those unmarked railroad crossings marked. Well, he was an advocate after that for train safety and wanting things to be better for travel. Those are 3 of his collections of short stories. And then he also wrote, not a ton, but he wrote some plays. He was involved in journalism and had a lot of writing there. And he was involved in some collaborations with other authors, which is, you know, a little bit interesting to me. These are his nonfiction writings, and I wanted to show you these because of the third mainly. The Life of Our Lord. He wrote that well, not exclusively, because obviously he sold it later and we can read it, but he authored it to help his kids understand Christianity. And Greg and I were talking about that a little bit today. Greg's read this book, by the way, The Life of Our Lord by Charles Dickens. And really, and I saw this in some other writings about Charles Dickens, he seems to be a Unitarian or a deist. So he would not believe Jesus is the Son of God the way we do. In fact, probably feels Jesus was just a really good man, and that the cross was, hey, that's a great example for us, someone giving their very life for what they believe in, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So he wouldn't have the same view we do, but he did want his kids to understand religion and live a good life. He wanted people to do the right thing, and that's a lot of why he wrote A Christmas Carol. He wanted to show some of the injustices that were happening there in Great Britain, particularly in London, and have a commentary about it, but also a very wonderful novella for us to enjoy. These are all his Christmas books: A Christmas Carol, which we're talking about today, The Chimes, The Cricket on the Hearth, The Battle of Life, and The Haunted Man and the Ghost's Bargain. Obviously, he liked ghosts, writing about that. So here, I've already mentioned a few of these things. At age 12, he left school and began factory work due to his father's imprisonment. His father was thrown in jail because he had a 40-pound debt. And they had debtors' prisons and workhouses in Great Britain at the time. And talk to a historian, but it's my understanding that it's in our Constitution that we cannot have debtors' prisons. Here, if you owe money, you cannot be thrown into jail here in the United States. And probably from all the experiences people had in Europe, they didn't want that to be a reason. I mean, how do you earn money and pay the debt if you're in jail? You know, I've always wondered how that worked, but apparently it worked because the kids went to work. So this was part of why Charles Dickens was adamant about children's rights, why he was very concerned about changing things in society for the better, for those who were down and out, those who were hurting, because he was one of them. He grew up in a big family and they did not have wealth, obviously. He edited a weekly journal for 20 years. Again, the 15 novels, the 5 novellas, hundreds of short stories and articles. His first novel was the Pickwick Papers. He wrote that at age 24. And as we talked about, there were spin-offs from that. There was merchandise, all sorts of things that we would think of today. I think one thing I read about this, there were shirts. I mean, we don't think of people in the 1800s in Great Britain wearing t-shirts. And I doubt they were t-shirts like our t-shirts, but there was clothing based on this. So just really wild. Not only did he write professionally, but he was a prolific letter writer. He wrote tons of letters and had correspondence with many, many people. He lectured a lot and he performed public readings. And one article I read about him said that to their knowledge, he was the very first person to do this as part of, for a living, to go off and just read, his books. He came to the United States at least twice. And on one of those trips, he made 19,000 pounds in like 2 months, just going to various venues and reading his books. Now, I think to make 19,000 pounds today in Great Britain in 2 months would not be shabby. And so in the mid 1800s, who knows what that translates into, but he was savvy with his marketing. He was prolific with his writing, and he was great. Another thing Greg and I talked about just a teeny bit today, as far as English style, as far as his writing, I mean, Greg just said, well, he's Charles Dickens. And that's the fact of the matter. He kind of defines to some extent what is good and what is not good. But anyway, he made a lot of money doing the public readings. And as mentioned, he was very into children's rights. He was very into changing education and other social reforms. The story, A Christmas Carol, the book, it was originally going to be a pamphlet. He was just going to write a pamphlet advocating for children's rights. He wanted some changes to take place. And then the more he thought about it, the more he decided, you know what, this will be more effective. And so he wrote A Christmas Carol. And so let's talk about the characters. Enough on Charles Dickens himself. The amount of information is unbelievable. If you want to know more about his life, there are biographies, tons of internet sites, people in literature at universities, they do research papers, they write, they write theses, master's theses, they write, dissertations, all sorts of stuff on Charles Dickens. Okay, so the very first character, or the main character, obviously, Ebenezer Scrooge. In the Peloton commercial, he's called Scrooge. In the Mercedes commercial, he's called Ebenezer. These names we just know. And we know with Scrooge, if someone's a Scrooge, they hate Christmas, they're not nice, they're selfish, they've got a bad attitude. And that's the case. That's how he is, I guess we should say, at the beginning of this story. He owns basically what would be now today an accountant's office, and he's a money changer, a money counter, and he's just very frugal, which is the nice way to put it. He's definitely inappropriate in the way he treats other people, and that comes through very, very strongly. And I was thinking, every other character, Marley, even the spirits, the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, the ghost of Christmases yet to come, all of them have a goal of changing Scrooge. And the people that he's meanest to, Bob Cratchit, who works for him, he works there in the office, and has a large family, so some similarities to Dickens' family growing up. Bob Cratchit has a large family. They hardly have any money. Ebenezer Scrooge won't even let him add a piece of coal to get a little more warmth. Scrooge says at one point, darkness is cheap. He doesn't light the stuff around his house. He wants to save as much money as possible. He wants to stay cold year round, because warmth costs money. But anyway, Bob Cratchit takes the brunt, at least in this, of Ebenezer's bad attitude, because he works with him. And again, he has the large family. His youngest child is Tiny Tim. And Tiny Tim, it's never stated in the book what his debilitating disease or his illness is, but there are 4 or 5 that were going around in Great Britain at the time, which could be what he had. 4 or 5 different illnesses and things, which if you had money, you could get treated. If you didn't have money, you couldn't. And so, of course, Tiny Tim, when the ghost of Christmas yet to come, or it's in the present, that ghost tells Scrooge, well, you know what I see is I see a crutch sitting off to the side with no one, holding the crutch, and a stool with no one in it. And so without Scrooge's change and intervention, Tiny Tim is going to die. But of course, in the end, he does not. Jacob Marley is Scrooge's partner there at the office up until 7 years to the day before this. Jacob Marley died. The beginning of the book talks about, and I'll quote it in a little bit, read the quote for you, but he's dead. And you need to know this. He's dead as a doornail. And so Jacob Marley died 7 years before, but on the 7th anniversary of his death, he comes back to warn Scrooge, hey, this is what's going to happen. Some spirits are going to visit you. And obviously, I don't think any of us would want to hear that. But anyway, so that's who Jacob Marley is. In the book, typically just Marley. The ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas yet to come. These 3 spirits visit Scrooge, and all of them, I mean, it's hard. Scrooge wouldn't learn his lesson probably without it being very in his face. And these ghosts, these spirits do provide that for him. And it does change him. And in fact, even right with the first spirit, even with Marley, you could say, at the end of Marley's visit, Scrooge looks out the window, sees all the other spirits who are burdened with chains and all the awful things they've done throughout life. And even then, to the extent that Scrooge believed it at that point, he wanted to change. And then definitely after the ghost of Christmas past, he was ready for the next ghost. In fact, anticipating the ghost of Christmas present. And he was a little later than Scrooge thought he should be. But anyway, so all 3 of the spirits who come and visit him. Fred is Scrooge's nephew. Scrooge has a sister. I'll just go ahead and bring that up. Fan, the last name down there. Fan is his sister, who has since passed on. Her son is Fred. And Fan was one who helped him in his childhood. We'll get to that when we get to the first section or the second section of the book. But Fred is his nephew, and Fred every single year would come to Ebenezer Scrooge and invite his uncle to Christmas dinner. And every single year, Scrooge would bah humbug him and explain how Christmas was a waste. He had to shut down his business for a day. How in the world can that be possible? How can I lose out on a day's profit? I bet Scrooge liked it when Christmas fell on Saturday or Sunday. That's not in the book, but anyway, I bet he did. So Fred plays an important role because he shows how someone, even being told no over and over and over again, he still shows love. He still shows kindness. He still is willing to reach out to Scrooge. And then the last 5 down there, and there are even a few other people in the book, but did I put I didn't put the gentleman in, but we'll talk about that in a second. Fezziwig was to Scrooge what Scrooge is to Bob Cratchit. Scrooge worked for Fezziwig, and but Fezziwig was nothing like Scrooge. He treated his subordinates very, very well. In fact, threw the most marvelous Christmas parties every year, and loads of people, loads of fun, loads of food, just something very, very generous. And it says that Fezziwig, he wasn't like super, like this was a little stretch for him to do, but he did it. Belle was Ebenezer's love when he was young, and they had promised each other. They were hitched in some way, engaged to be married. And over time, Ebenezer became more and more selfish and more greedy, wanting money and hoarding money. And, you know, that just wasn't the person that Belle fell in love with. And they ended up breaking that engagement. Peter Cratchit and Martha Cratchit are 2 of the other kids in the Cratchit family mentioned by name. So, okay, the actual story, an overview of the story. This is the inside, this is the title page in the edition right here that I've got. It says, A Christmas Carol in Prose, being a ghost story of Christmas. And then he writes, Charles Dickens does, in December 1843, I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of I better read it up here. Out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. And so the idea of laying it is a little play on words. Back in the day, we would still maybe talk this way, but obviously he doesn't want someone to put the book down and forget about it. But also, to lay a ghost was the same as to have a I lost the word. An exorcism. So and it's the same idea, getting rid of or pushing aside. An exorcism would be getting that spirit. And so he's saying this ghost of a story, this book, you know, don't lay it aside and don't exorcise it. Don't get rid of it in any way. And of course, it's a ghost story. So anyway, kind of clever there. And he says, their faithful friend and servant, Charles Dickens. And then one of the first things that I noticed is that there aren't chapters in this book. They're called staves, which read staff. We get our musical staff from the same idea. And of course, we can see it right in the title. He considers this a Christmas carol. This is a song. This is music to us. And of course, it's not written that way. It's not a musical. It's not, but that's why he calls it the first chapter, we would call it. That's why he says stave 1, stave 2, stave 3, stave 4, and stave 5. You can think of a bar in music, or, you know, this is the first, this is the second, down through the 5th. So anyway, pretty cool. I thought that was pretty neat. The titles are Marley's Ghost. Again, his business partner who had died 7 years past, he comes back 7 years later, and that's the first, basically the first. And then the first of the 3 spirits is stave 2. The second of the 3 spirits is stave 3. The last of the spirits, stave 4. And then he just calls stave 5 the end of it. And I like that very much. Greg, you probably like that too. Greg likes there to be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then you're done. So, all right. So, and it's 7:31. We're right in the middle. All right. So stave 1 is called Marley's Ghost. And in this section, we kind of get the mood and we get the setting. Scrooge is sitting there, Bob Cratchit's working with numb fingers. I mean, it's freezing. And anyway, and we get this mood, we get this feeling in this stave. And the first person to come in is Fred, his nephew. and Fred invites him to Christmas dinner, and Fred, and I'll show you some quotes in a little bit, but Fred wants him to come despite his bad attitude, besides his ball humbugness. And but he sends Fred away, with a ball humbug, and out the door he goes. And then some gentlemen come in. Go ahead and bring up that next line. Some gentlemen come in wanting a donation, two portly gentlemen, I think it says, and they come in and they want, and Scrooge, there's no way he's going to give them money because he pays taxes, and part of that tax money goes to the debtors' prisons and goes to the workhouses. And so there are places to send these people who don't have money. And so anyway, so he obviously has a bad attitude toward the gentleman. And this is all part of leading into what's going to happen in the story. He ball humbugs Fred, he ball humbugs people who want charity, and he ball humbugs Bob Cratchit. This is where we find out he's kind of upset that Bob won't be coming in the next day, which is Christmas. And why should he lose a day's earnings? Why should Scrooge lose a day's work? And obviously just a terrible attitude. But again, this sets up the amazing transformation that takes place when he's confronted with his bad behavior and his bad attitude, his greed and his selfishness when you get down to it. Jacob Marley then enters in. So Scrooge does his normal thing. He locks up the where he works. He has a meal. He walks home and he sees Marley's face in his door knocker. He goes up the steps and he sees, instead of his normal door knocker, he sees Marley's face, and he's very startled by this, and he kind of clears his head and refocuses, and then it's just the door knocker again. He goes on in, locks the door, does all his stuff. You get a little more feel for Scrooge. This is probably where he says darkness is cheap. He doesn't want to light any lights. He doesn't want to do anything like that. And then Jacob Marley shows up in all his chains, all his weight that he's dealing with. And really here in stave one, not only do we get a feel for how terrible Scrooge is, but we also, Dickens sets up this whole narrative concerning the rich versus the poor. And again, I mean, it's just a great story, but in Dickens' setting and in his time there in the 1840s in Great Britain, he did not like the fact that there were people like Scrooge, that there were rich people who, had their thumbs on the poor. And he did want things to change, and this was a part of that, wanted things to be better for the people. And we'll get to that when we look at the insights a little bit more. But this sets all that up. And a few quotes from stave one, and this is the very first line of the book. Marley was dead to begin with. There was no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. Notice, of course, Scrooge was not the chief mourner. And Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. And he goes on to say, dead as a doornail, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, for Marley to show up, if the reader doesn't know that he's dead, then obviously there's no meaning in that. He's a ghost. He's someone who's been roaming around for 7 years around the earth without a place. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. If I could work my will, said Scrooge indignantly, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding, Bill and Lynn's pudding, and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. So it's not just like the animated Scrooge, the Disney, the Mickey Mouse. This is pretty unbelievable. Anyone saying Merry Christmas, boiled in their own pudding with a spear of holly through their heart. I mean, that's pretty severe, little over the top, I think, but that's how Scrooge felt. Very, very, pretty much crazy. So Marley comes, and this is part of what Marley says. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. without their visits, said the ghost. You cannot hope without their visits, said the ghost. You cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us. And so here, Marley, notice what he says. You cannot hope to shun the path I tread without their visits. And so Marley's goal is for Scrooge to change. Marley doesn't want Scrooge to have to go through what he has gone through. And that is to bear the burden of regret, the burden of recognizing one's sins. And Marley he had already gone around 7 years with that. And he didn't want Scrooge to have to deal with that. So this is like in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, or at least similar to it. The rich man wanted his brothers to know. He wanted, and I think that's the normal reaction. I think hopefully those of us in Christ, we want what's best for other people, even if we're suffering. We have a few people and a lot of people in our world who, if I have to suffer, everyone has to suffer. But that's not how someone should think. And with the rich man and with this, and you wonder if Dickens might have been thinking about the rich man. The truth of the matter is that if someone has passed on and they're experiencing torment, like the rich man in the story we have in Luke, then, they would not want other people to have to deal with that. And Marley is telling Scrooge, look, you need to pay attention to these 3 spirits, or you'll have to do what I'm doing. And that is bear the weight of what you have done. So that's a little summary of the first stave. So stave 2 is the first of the 3 spirits, which you guessed it, the ghost of Christmas past. So the ghost takes Scrooge first off to the countryside where his childhood home was, and kind of shows him around a little bit. Scrooge notes that he remembers everything. Like he has great recollection, every single mailbox. I don't know if all of the items exactly right, but every single turn, every single driveway, he remembers it all. And then he's in his school and he's left all alone. No one else is in the schoolroom. And a very traumatic event for a child, left alone. And this is when his sister Fran shows up. She shows up to take him home. Everything's better, she says, and he's able to go home. But a very traumatic event. And then he gets to see Fezziwig, again, looking at the past. They're there, and he's seeing how great that was. The great party, the great food, the great generosity of Fezziwig. And then the ghost takes him to see Belle. And he's devastated at that point. He already wants to go back. He's already told the first of the 3 spirits, I've had enough, I want to go. But then when he sees Belle, it's just over. He can't really stand himself and dealing with these things in the past anymore. He takes his hat and tries to put it over the spirit, tries to take out his or her light, and can't do it. The light is seeping out from under the hat, and then all of a sudden it kind of closes down and he's back in his bed. So here we see with him in the schoolhouse, him not throwing parties like Fezziwig did, not having a wife and children because of his drifting away from Belle. We see kind of here that greed equals solitude. If all someone wants is money, if all someone wants is material goods, they're going to end up being alone. So some quotes from this section. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. I have come to bring you home, dear brother, said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. To bring you home, home, home. He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which, in some strange way, there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer. In the struggle, Scrooge observed that his light, that it should be his, that his light was burning high and bright, and deeply connecting that with its influence over him. He sees the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon his head. So he wanted out of there. And I think that, just a side note, really, I think all of us, we would not want to, if we were in Scrooge's shoes, we would not want to go back and see all the ways that we had kind of destroyed our lives. And that's what the Spirit makes Scrooge do, of course. And then the second one comes. And it starts with a beautiful Christmas scene. The second Spirit, if you've seen any of the adaptations, is, a jovial, giant, man, just full of life and vigor and a little bit crazy. But this is what he sees first in stave 3. And then he's taken to Bob Cratchit's home. He's taken to see the joy that they have, even in their poverty. The fact that they love each other, the fact that they're, that they are having a good Christmas time. This is also when he finds out, when he starts asking about Tiny Tim and starts getting a feeling for what is going to happen. Well, this Spirit takes him around to people that are kind of alone, but still full of the Christmas spirit. Still people full of joy and wanting to be nice to each other. Miners who are just among themselves. Shipmates who, it says, normally are kind of like a sailor to each other, but even on Christmas Day, they're being nice. They're being appropriate. They're saying a kinder word. And then he goes to Fred's home, and some of the most devastating moments in all these adaptations is when, Scrooge is trying to get in on the game. They're playing a guessing game, and he can't, figure out what it, and of course the answer ends up being Scrooge, the animal, the beast, the one that's, rips people apart. And I mean, it's him. And a devastating moment in that. And then here we see a little bit more of the upper class versus the lower class. There was a writing that came out probably 45 years before Scrooge, before Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, and he really hated it. It was about the inevitability of food running out on the planet, and if someone couldn't work, if someone wasn't good enough, they should just die. And that was the pamphlet. It was written like in 1798. That population was going to expand exponentially. I don't think that was the word used, but maybe cubically, and food would just be, linear, and there was no way it could keep up. And so this part of this was in response to that. He was very vocal about that feeling, and the fact that people in England in that day kind of felt the same way. Well, if someone can't handle it, whatever happens to him happens to him, and that's just the way it is. So anyway, so we get a little bit of a feel for that in this section. I just have one quote from this section, stave 3. Much they saw and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The Spirit stood behind sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign land, and they were close at home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. By poverty, and it was rich. In an almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man and his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the Spirit out, he left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. And so Scrooge sees that no matter what's going on in someone's life, they can still have joy. They can still be, and especially have, what Dickens is calling the Christmas spirit, have the right attitude on Christmas Eve and through these, the holiday. And then the last of the spirits, and I didn't double check. I wanted to double check this. Any of you who have read it recently, I don't think the third spirit ever says a word. Is that correct? Okay, that is correct. Okay, yeah, the last spirit says nothing. And Scrooge keeps asking questions and wants to know, because the Spirit is taking him around and showing him different people reacting to the death of someone. And Scrooge keeps wanting to know, who is it? Who is the person who has died? Yeah, Jay, go ahead.
A couple years ago, you actually see his face instead of you normally don't. His mouth is shut.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So the third spirit in this adaptation, of course, that's not mentioned in the book, but his mouth is sewn shut. So anyway, yeah, he doesn't say a word. So the first place this spirit takes Scrooge is the London Stock Exchange, and people are talking about this man's death. Then he takes him to some vagabonds who had owed this man some money, and they had stolen stuff from him, stole his curtains, stole some other things from his house, obviously because he was dead. And then they go to Bob Cratchit's home, and in this scene, there's no joy. In fact, I think I have a quote, but they're all just there and they're still. Because not only has there been a death of this rich man, the unknown man to Scrooge at this point, but also Tiny Tim is gone. And then finally, this spirit takes him to the graveyard. And he finally sees the name, and he finally knows that this person that everyone is talking bad about, everyone who didn't really care, it was him. And in here, we see not necessarily this class struggle in 1840s England, or rich versus poor, that kind of thing, but just the human condition of the fear of death and moral reckoning. And we won't specifically talk about that, but even Dickens used to complain, by the way, Dickens in his life, he would complain about how no one went to church anymore. So, what happens here tends to happen in Europe way, way before. And of course, the people who came here were people who wanted religious freedom. People who came here were people that wanted to get out from underneath a lot of things in Europe and have the ability to work. So we had a higher percentage of worshiping people, at least at the beginning, than we did. So these trends tend to go that way. I was really kind of shocked in reading about Dickens' life that he kind of had a bad attitude toward organized religion because of that, because no one was going to church. Attendance in the churches had just dwindled. And so, at least there in Great Britain. So anyway, so this is one of the things we see with the last spirit, obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, but we do. So a few quotes from here. Let me see some tenderness. Scrooge wants to find someone who cares. Let me see some tenderness connected with a death, said Scrooge, or that dark chamber spirit, which we left just now, will be forever present to me. The ghost conducted him, of course, the ghost said nothing. The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. He wasn't seen. I don't know if he regularly would have been at the stock exchange, but he wasn't there. He wasn't on the streets when they saw the vagabonds, just wherever they went, he wasn't seeing himself. Still hadn't figured things out yet. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated around the fire. Quiet, very quiet. A big contrast to what we had seen in Bob Cratchit's home before. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues. So very, very sad. A churchyard. Here then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death. What a great line. Not life. That's the point. Not life. A worthy place for this one who had died, and no one cared about. And then this is near the end of that stave. Good spirit, he pursued, as down upon the ground he fell before it. Your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. The kind hand trembled. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strove within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone. It's similar to, we'll get to it in a minute. There are two figures underneath one of the spirit's cloaks, and the spirit says, unless one should wipe away the writing on the young boy's forehead. So anyway, similar to that, but sponge away the writing on this stone is what, of course, Ebenezer wants to do. He basically, obviously, is wanting to know, is this set in stone or can I change this? Is this absolutely going to happen, or is this what will happen if I don't change? And of course, it ends up being, it would have been what happened if he had not changed, but he did, which is awesome. And then the final stave 5 is the end of it. It's very short. I forget how many pages in my edition, but just very, very quick. He shouts praises. He's singing, he's dancing. His hand is still shaky. He can hardly shave. He's shaving. He's doing his morning routine, but he can hardly do it because of the shaking. But he's able to do it. He finally gets all that done, and then he gets the Christmas turkey, the prize turkey. And there was way more writing on turkey versus goose in some of the things written about A Christmas Carol than any of us would care to read. But the tradition in Great Britain is a goose, but that's because a goose is cheap to buy. The wealthy, the upper class, they had turkeys in Great Britain at that time. Supposedly, like I said, there was so much written about that. It was just, I think sometimes people are trying to, shove things into Charles Dickens' mind that, we can't ask him about. But anyway, it is a Christmas turkey, a sign of wealth. And of course, it was the prize turkey. And Scrooge even says it's twice the size of Tiny Tim, which is really funny. He then, after buying the turkey and having it delivered or setting that all in motion, he sees those gentlemen that he had refused the day before, and he offers them, to make up for all lost. Well, I might be putting in something from the movies, but he offers a great donation, and so they're very pleased with that. They're excited, and then finally he goes to Fred's. He goes to his nephew's house, and I can't remember the words, but he asks humbly if he can, if he's still invited, if he can still be there. Then he sneaks back to the office. He's hoping on the day after Christmas, here in Stave 5, he's hoping to get to the office before Bob so that he can play a trick on him and kind of make him think he's in trouble, because he knows he's going to be late the day after Christmas. And so he has that interaction, and I'll show you that in just a second. And then, of course, God bless us, everyone, Tiny Tim's words. And so let me move up right to here. See the end of the story real quick.
A full 16 minutes late. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, sir. I am a bit behind on my time.
You are indeed. Step in here.
Well, it's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday.
Now, I'll tell you what, Mr. Cratchit. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I am about to raise your salary. Merry Christmas to you, Bob. Merry Christmas, Bob. My good fellow. Then I've given you in many a year. I'll raise your salary and do whatever I can to help your struggling family. And we'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a bowl of Christmas punch. But first, let's make up the fires. I want you to go out and buy another scuttle of coal before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. Off with you, Bob. We've wassailing to do. Hey-ho, Bob!
Yes, sir. Right away, sir.
And Scrooge was better than his word. He did all that he said he would, and more.
And to our Tiny Tim, who got well, Scrooge was like a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city ever knew. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,
God bless us. everyone.
And we're all crying. So some insights, and I'll run through them. I'm not going to read the quotes, but we see a lot of different statements about generosity or the lack of it with Scrooge. And then we see a lot of statements about regret, especially from Marley and him not wanting Scrooge to deal with regret. Moral responsibility. And this was something very, very important to Dickens. Of course, it's important to all of us as well. And then just having that Christmas spirit, but of course, as Scrooge says, not just on Christmas Day, but that spirit of giving and love and care throughout the year. And then some other things that are true about our world. I'll get these up here real quick so you can see them all four of those. We see what we saw with Hamlet. We see a lot of talk or a realization of mortality. And in this, the idea of an afterlife, which resonates, of course, very well with us. Human nature comes through in this very strongly. Scrooge showing the dark, bitter side at first, the greedy side, the what would be the extreme of humanity on the negative. And then we see the extreme of humanity on the positive once we get to the end of the story, and with every other character in the book. Everyone wanted Scrooge to change, even people who were mad at him. And that's the greatest, maybe, worldview difference for us as Christians, is the hope for change. There are a lot of people in the world who don't believe people can change. They believe that people are just the way they're going to be. And I mean, what is our business as God's people if we don't believe people can change? I mean, obviously, we all know that through Christ we've changed, and that is the message of hope that we have for the world. The message of hope we have for others, that someone can change. And for Dickens, I think he wanted more than just individual change, but I think he probably realized that individual change leads to cultural change. And so we must think some of those same things. So let's go ahead and have a prayer, and we'll close. But then after that, since it's a minute till 8, but I'm definitely, if you want to ask questions or make any comments after that, we can shut down we can do that informally as you eat various wonderful things over there. All right, let's bow.